Hello. Our gospel today is taken from John's Gospel, chapter 20. Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with the other disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Today, we celebrate the feast of St. Thomas, and the gospel reading is one of the resurrection stories of the Easter season. It's a story about someone who needs to see Jesus in order to believe. For Thomas, seeing is believing, as they say. He was one of Jesus' disciples, one of Jesus' closest friends and followers. And he's become known as Doubting Thomas, but actually I think Thomas the Doubter is really more Thomas the Brave. Thomas the Brave and Honest, actually. Earlier in John's Gospel, when Jesus finds out that his friend Lazarus is unwell and decides to go see him, even though going toward Jerusalem was risky, Thomas says, "Let's go with Jesus and die." Jesus didn't die on that occasion, but Thomas seems to sense that Jesus would die, and yet he continued to follow him, to be with Jesus. He had courage, and he kept asking questions. On the night before Jesus died, it was Thomas who said to Jesus, "We don't know where you're going. How can we know the way?" So maybe we need to think of Thomas as more of a courageous realist rather than a doubter. And he could be a faithful, courageous realist and have questions, because that's okay. Questions are okay. After Jesus' crucifixion, it seems that Thomas stayed away from the other disciples, and maybe Thomas, the faithful, courageous realist, was out getting on with life rather than cowering behind locked doors. In any case, he wasn't there the first time Jesus appeared to his friends. And when they told Thomas about the news of the resurrection, that they'd seen the risen Jesus, Thomas was like, "I'm not going to believe that unless I actually see him and have proof." And he wanted fairly graphic proof. But when he did see Jesus, his questions were answered and he was blessed. And Jesus said, "Those who haven't seen and believe will be blessed too." All those who encounter Jesus throughout the ages, including through the stories of others. And that's the blessing that's brought us here today as a community of faith at St. John's, seeking to walk the way of love. We're on the journey, but there still are lots of questions. What do I need to see, to hear, to experience, to enable me to walk the way of love, to be a disciple of Jesus? What do you need to believe in Jesus? Or what do you need to believe in Jesus? What was Jesus inviting us into when he talked about loving God and loving neighbor, about being his disciples? How are we to walk in love in his name? During the Walking in Love Advent series, we were talking about the faith and witness of various people, and one of the people mentioned is that great woman of God, Sister Joan Chittister. And I've talked about her work before. She wrote this wonderful book called The Gift of Years. But she's also written another book called In Search of Belief. And this is what she writes. "Belief is not contrary to fact. It simply transcends it. To believe something is to know its truth, not so much in our minds, but in the center of our souls. We believe in goodness, for instance, because however effective evil seems to be, it contradicts the highest aspirations of humanity. We believe in love rather than hate, because love draws out the best in us, while hate feeds our smallness." She goes on to say, belief is the ability to know what we cannot see. None of our beliefs, if they're really belief, are sure in the ways that chemicals in scales are sure. Belief is sure in the way that truth is sure. So what do we have to do? What do we have to believe to be a disciple of Jesus, to be part of what Bishop Michael Curry calls the Jesus movement? And what if we have doubts and questions? Thomas had doubts and questions, and Jesus answered him and met him at his point of need and in his doubts and questions. And we can have doubts and questions too. We who have not seen are invited into this amazing blessing, and we're invited questions and doubts and all. And maybe you have a burning question or a troubling doubt, and I would invite you to be part of a small group, like maybe the Wednesday morning Reading Between the Lines group, because it's a good place where we can wrestle with the questions and wrestle with the doubts with others who are on the journey of faith. I give thanks for St. Thomas, a faithful, courageous realist who wasn't afraid to ask questions. As we ponder this question of belief, I'm reminded of the story of the father who wanted Jesus to heal his son. He cried out to Jesus, "I believe, help me in my unbelief." Pray for me, and I will pray for you, that we may wrestle together, share our hopes and our doubts, and our questions as we walk the way of love. Amen.